Welcome to another conversation with the Apostate Sisters. I'm Patty, and I make this podcast with my sister Nancy. We grew up in a doomsday cult called the Worldwide Church of God. In this season, we're currently going through a series based on bodily autonomy. Today's topic brings us to purity culture. Be forewarned that today's topic is not all fun. There may be some topics covered that are triggering for you. If you grew up in purity culture, know that your experiences are valid and the harm is real. We're going to unpack the harm that it caused us, some of our friends, but together we'll process our feelings about going through purity culture. We'll hold space for our stories and for your stories, and we'll heal together. Let's get to it. And if you haven't heard, the Apostate Sisters now have a Patreon. The link is in the description.
I believe we spoke about purity culture, not in depth, but during one of our audio recordings, one of those episodes touched on purity culture a little bit. I know there's a lot of different ways we could take this.
Yeah, I'm hoping that today, Nancy, we can talk about kind of what our direct experiences were, both in the WCG, the Worldwide Church of God, but also kind of the messaging we got in evangelical spaces, because you and I were both evangelicals then in our like young adulthood when we were both single, at least for a time. And so that was like also a place we were getting that messaging. So I'm hoping we can cover that.
I feel like it was more so in evangelicalism, actually.
Oh, like
Like it was more obvious. It was out there in society when it came to evangelicalism. Maybe it was the time period too, when books like I Kiss Dating Goodbye came out and the purity rings and all that, which we'll discuss. But I feel like in the Worldwide Church of God, it was just like, nope, this is a law. There's no room for discussion. This is what you follow. You're just, you're designed just for the person you're going to be married to, and there's no questions asked.
I think that was a really good summary of where we both found ourselves in evangelicalism, though. But I think part of the reason we were so susceptible to the messaging and the like the purityness of evangelicalism is because that is, like you were saying in the WCG, it was just how it was assumed to be. It was
Right.
just, there was no like trying to convince you or tell you that the world was wrong about this and that, and here's why, like the evangelicals did. It was, yeah, it was God's law, and you were just evil and
Mhm.
would get spanked or whatever if you were doing anything sexual. And so it was a whole different level of control in the WCG. It was more like an effort to shut down any and all sexuality, sexual thoughts, etc.,
Mhm.
in us as kids, with just the blanket explanation that it was for our husband. So, like, in a way, if we're talking purity culture, like as a cultural phenomenon, that is definitely more of a evangelical driven thing.
Oh yeah.
Um, so it's like our church kind of had this weird coinciding of, 1950s expectations for behavior, meeting up, like being, and then being supported with, bullshit from the Bible. But then on the tail end of the WCG way, just upholding tradition, you get all of the evangelical stuff starting to like back it up and boost it. So it was like we kind of found ourselves in the like those two waters crashing together.
They focused obviously very heavily on the girls. It's just like, it wasn't so much on the boys' side. It was like, you girls hold the power. Don't dress in a provocative way. The choice has to be yours. You do not give it up. And I feel like girls were made to feel like, yes, that's your choice, which was very different to WCG. You're just like, no, you don't have a choice in the matter. You're not going to do this. Whereas in evangelicalism, it was like, you are choosing to be pure because you want to be righteous for God. You want to honor God in this way. Yeah, it's kind of making me think of Girl Defined.
What? You chose to save sex for marriage? Like all of you? Why did you choose to do that? Was it worth it? Like, You're
That's really
crazy.
strange. But I just want to say really quick that if you're someone who has had sex before marriage and you're like, man, I regret that. I really do want to honor God in this area in my life, then we want you to know that God's forgiveness is extended to all of us, that He offers grace and forgiveness, and that any day for any of us, as we've made choices in the past, we can choose today to draw a line in the sand and say, God, would you help me from this point forward to walk faithfully for you?
God has called us to something in His Word that says, hey, don't be sexually immoral.
It all falls on us and how we dress and how we act and how we are not supposed to be temptresses. Don't show too much fucking skin.
Well, there's like an illusion of choice in the evangelical model, right? Like they're making it seem like
Yep.
you're getting to choose that because you choose to honor God because of la 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 love, whatever, blah blah blah. Whereas WCG, there wasn't a choice. It was like, you do this or else, and it was or else from our parents, or else from Herbert, or else from God, right? So there is a difference in that. And maybe that is an interesting, like, little line, since you and I both hang out kind of on the cult recovery and the ex-evangelical space, like sides of content making here.
It's almost like giving these girls a false sense of empowerment. Be like, yes, you are making the right choice. So it's a little bit of a step towards being, I don't know, more progressive.
Being autonomous,
It's not
except it's
progressive, it's not
not.
autonomous, but yeah, like you said, it's the illusion of it.
Yeah,
So,
right, because it's not really real. They say, "Oh, you're choosing it." But no, because if you don't choose it, you're ostracized from all your friends and family, community, resources, friends. I already said friends, right? Like, oh yes,
mm-hmm.
you have this choice to do the right thing, but like, no, you don't. Because if you don't do the right thing, like you're out of there. Like you lose everything,
Right.
right? So yeah, it's like a false autonomy. And I
Yeah.
think
Is it
that's
really a choice?
a really sweet place for religions to hang out because people love the feeling of autonomy.
Mm-hmm.
And so if they feel
And
like they've
choice.
got it, but they're still going to do the thing you want them to do, like, hot damn, you've got it.
Even today, there are YouTube channels of women that are explaining how you can dress in a way that is more modest and to honor God.
Oh, it's like a whole girly Christian influencer thing now. Like, here's all my looks of how I honor God. Like, what the fuck?
But I feel like this has just gained some momentum and it is starting to get more popular again. Whereas I feel like it was in the 90s, I think, when purity culture began, because I didn't realize that was an evangelical thing at all. I had no idea. And I
Right,
thought
right.
it went a lot further back than it did, but I believe it did start in the 90s and then went on into the early 2000s. And then it kind of veered off for quite a few years, but now it's back with a vengeance, and all these YouTube content creators, women are saying, wear this. Don't show it, like it's coming back for whatever reason.
Well, if people can get clicks and merch sales off of it, it's coming back. Right? Isn't that the whole thing? Taking into consideration all the different ideas out there. Here's the definition we're working off of for today. Okay. A set of beliefs and social practices promoting sexual abstinence until heterosexual marriage, often tied to one's value, especially for women being linked to purity.
Okay, if a woman has sex before she's married, what fucking difference does that make? I'm not understanding
Yeah,
what's the problem. Because God's watching and he said, don't.
right. What are the reasons given for that? I don't know. God's law, right? Like that's what we were told as kids was God's law. And there was no questioning it, like you said. So like we might say, well, why? Like you're just asking now. But we would just be told because that's God's perfect plan. To and then there'd be a quote, right? God's plan to prosper you, not to harm you or whatever, right? And then la la la, you're supposed to ignore it and keep going and be like, okay, I guess that's good enough answer then.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But we know now scientifically that technically there really isn't anything different about a vagina that's been fucked and one that hasn't.
Correct. There is no breaking of a hymen. It
No,
just slowly stretches, as we understood from the show On the Line, chewed gum.
that's right. And actually, they were saying if it breaks and bleeds, probably did it wrong. And you probably weren't gentle. And you probably
Mm-hmm.
didn't work through it in a way that would be more honoring of the bodies involved. Yeah. So virginity is bullshit anyway. We know that the whole thing with WCG, the intention was to make sure we didn't think we owned our own bodies,
Right.
right? To know that it was for our husbands, especially as girls in the WCG. We were told that. Mm-hmm. Well, right. And it isn't just about like if we had a penis put into us or not. Right. Like that's what we're talking about. Like,
In
oh,
which
have
hole,
you
Beth?
had a finger up your nose? Oh no, I can't talk to you anymore. You're going to hell. You have had a finger up your nose. Like that's what we're talking about here. Like, yeah. But it wasn't just that. It wasn't just that one place on our body. It was also about like how we acted and presented ourselves in the world and
Hmm?
the modesty that we put forth. I remember so many conversations as a kid about where the skirt fell on our legs. You know, if it started to be any skin above what could be constituted as the knee, then all of a sudden you were kind of in dangerous territory. And why? You know, it's like go back to what, late 1800s, and in this country it was super scandalous if you saw a woman's ankles because you should only see ankles when she's flat on her back, apparently. I don't know. I think that's right. You know, like in a time, well, listen, in a time when women had worn long to the ground skirts for as long as anyone could remember, the only time you saw a woman's knees and ankles was, you know, kind of time. So that's where they started. And it's just, we're slowly chipping away at these like ridiculous ways of like keeping each other controlled.
Do you remember that movie Far and Away with Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman? It was one of their early ones.
Thank you. That was exactly what was in my head
Was
when I
it
was
that
talking
one
about
scene
ankles. Yeah, when
where
she's yeah, when
she's
it was
literally just
the poor boy that was with her, or the servant boy that was with her.
they were on the ship coming to the US from Ireland, and she's sitting, and part of her ankles are actually showing because her dress hikes up a little bit as she crosses her legs. And then some men are walking by. They're actually wealthy men. They're just kind of staring for a little bit. And Tom Cruise's character, who he's playing like her servant or whatever, coffee boy, he's like, I think you should cover your ankles. And he's just acting like it's the most insane thing. Like, what is wrong with you? You just let him. I'm sure they had a great time filming that, but I remember that scene very well.
And then they go and they move into like rent a room at a brothel.
Yes.
and
Will I be seeing you in church tomorrow morning?
Sounds divine and holy, Grace. We can share a pew, me and you.
Toodaloo.
Same to you.
She's got an awfully large chest to be going to church.
I just remember, okay, I was saying, I don't know why this movie has come up a lot lately and I haven't
I
watched it
love
in
that
years.
movie. Oh.
Later in the movie, there's this part, you know, he becomes like a boxer and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
One of the prostitutes is like, if he can keep his knuckles up all night, just imagine what his
And
willy
what his
can
willy
do.
can do.
And I just always remember being like a 12, 13-year-old girl watching that and being like, oh, I think I know what they mean.
Yep.
It's like, it's interesting then that did it take us, 50 years to get to from cover your ankles to skirts have to be at the knee, you know?
Mhm.
I mean, it kind of seems like it. So it's progress. It's just very slow because we can't quite handle ourselves and all of our new freedoms that we'd like to give ourselves. But ideally, I feel like we should all have a lot more freedom than we have and a lot more understanding of how our freedoms impact each other. Because if our freedom has a full understanding of other people's autonomy and the necessity for consent, like, to me, that's everything.
Right.
I think within there's going to be all kinds of little things to have good faith discussions on to decide, like, how can we do this in a way that's really good for everyone and respects everyone? Um, but beyond that, shouldn't we be giving as much freedom as possible and not doing things like purity culture, which repress and suppress with no consideration or outlet for the human emotions that are present in all of those situations?
But there are people that still want to keep that control, Pats. It's
Well,
the men who
it's
want to keep control of their women's. They don't want them behaving in a certain way. They want them pure and only for them.
and why is that? Why would they want their women pure and only for them?
Well, for one, for the ancestral line.
I agree with you.
They want to make sure that any children they have are theirs and theirs alone. They see all
So
throughout history.
patriarchy,
Yeah, patriarchy is alive and well.
it's dying. It knows it's dying. So it is clawing the sides. It is gasping for breath. We just need to keep moving and put the lid on it once and for all.
But are you concerned too that we're going to get to that point where we feel like we're progressing, and then we're going to have another situation where, like, another Reagan that comes in, and family values are going to be right back. We're going to be right back where we were.
I mean,
And
it's
all that
always
work.
like that. It's always like that. The pull of progress is always like that, like a line graph, right? We're over the long haul, we are always progressing, but there are definite ups and downs within that overarching um upward motion. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that I mean, I feel like Reagan was a big dip in our ability to progress as autonomous and empowered humans.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, I mean, look at what is it? Saudi Arabia. They were really quite avant-garde and very like fashionable and everything in the 70s and for women and everything. And then, yeah, they had a government takeover that put them all back in burqas. So that's how quickly things can change, even when we've got the patriarchy, against the ropes.
And the scary thing is, we have got it so much better than a lot of women in other countries
It's true. I
who
mean,
don't have a voice at all.
the fact that you and I can even be sitting here on the internet as women, saying the things we're saying and speaking out
Right.
against it is
Mhm.
like we gotta have a minute to be thankful for that because it's true. That's not something that women everywhere have, that's for sure. So, I
Yeah,
mean,
which,
it's quite a privilege even to be in a place where we can be at the point of seeking that next level of autonomy that we're seeking.
yeah, I like the changes that are taking place. Yeah.
Yeah, so for us, Nance, we were really lucky that our mom like actually had done the work and read some like Dr. Spock stuff. So she felt like it was really important for us to be aware of sex and like how it happens and what the parts are called and all of that stuff. So we
Really?
were really lucky. Well, I got told those things.
I didn't.
Okay. We'll see. All right. So what my point was going to be with this was that in our house, apparently it was shared with me, but that was absolutely not the case in other WCG families. In
Mhm.
fact, one of our very good friends, um, his experience in his house growing up was one that had even a lot more control and purity messaging. But it was like past the point of purity messaging, like we're going to talk about having received, especially in evangelical circles, what he got was just literally the omission of, like, no names for any parts other than pee and not even a discussion of the fact that girls have different parts than boys.
Mhm.
Um, and so it like created this layer of shame that I'm not sure I can even really understand or describe, but because it was so hidden that it was like you couldn't even talk about it, like it couldn't even be uttered. You know what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
and I think where the WCG did such a good job of controlling people about that was that they had a pretty extreme purity message, and then they also tried to say how they had a very progressive and sex positive message. They didn't say it in those words, but that was how he described it. And so what that meant, or like what I'm realizing looking at it now, is it meant that anybody from any religious background could come into the church with whatever their preconceived ideas about sex and purity were and find something that agreed with it. And we all know that when we do that, that's when we stop reading usually. And so it was like it allowed the messed upness or health of like sexual thinking that came from outside of the church, and it kind of just stayed, and it could be like, you know, kind of wound into the teachings however worked for people. And so there it meant that this friend of ours experienced a growing up in the church that was even more repressive than baseline growing up in the church. And so purity culture and the erasure of our sexuality in general is just so incredibly harmful to us being healthy, happy, whole humans because our sexuality is part of us. And I think that's a piece that even with what we did learn growing up, that I feel like I missed out on. The idea that this is a part of being human and it doesn't make you bad, right? Because it's like, I do think in general, it was really hard to say, oh, it's bad only in these contexts. The message that it was bad was so much stronger that that little bit of like, oh, except it's really good and beautiful and fun and yay in this one situation did nothing to counteract all of the shame and guilt attached to my body and how men looked at me.
To you, it was very important what men thought of you, correct? The boys?
Yes, but I would say it was in conflict at all times because I simultaneously understood that looking sexy and getting a man was what I wanted to do. Like I needed to get a man according to the church. I needed to get a man according to the culture. According to the church, I did that by being pure. According to the culture, I did that by being sexual. So it was a really confusing place to be. But
Right.
it was very obvious to me that being more sexual was actually more attractive to a man. And trying to say he's into the pureness was bullshit. That I understood. I mean, okay, it's not bullshit. There are definitely men who are attracted to the pureness, but it's a different kind of thing.
Yeah, that comes from a place of control. Like, oh, I have no problem
Ooh.
fucking this woman over here, but I see this woman as a possible wife for me, so I don't want her behaving a certain way. I don't want her behaving like the other women I sleep with. Like they have no problem fucking, the sexually expressive women that go out there and, sleep with whoever they want, which is their right. Go for it. But
Well,
their little wifey at home, that's not allowed. No.
that even shows up in Sex and the City.
Mhm.
Charlotte, when she's getting married to that guy, he finds her really attractive and
Mhm.
everything until they get married. And then he like can't see her as attractive anymore. It's like, oh,
Right.
you're not supposed to be sexy. You're my wife. Like, what? That is some messed up shit. But that is a
Right.
result of purity culture.
That's exactly it. Yes. Purity culture definitely affects the men, I'd say, just as much as women in different ways. In different ways.
I know,
So,
I feel like we're going to need to revisit purity culture and see what men think about it, having
hmm
gone through it, because not only did they experience the messaging they got, but they would have understood what was being said to us as well. I mean, we have to recognize that while we're being told that we have to keep our skirts long enough and not behave in these certain ways, that's like just by default telling the boys that they're predators. And it's almost like giving them permission to leer and behave that way at women,
Yeah.
and it automatically teaches disrespect of women that are more liberated and are choosing to wear whatever they want to wear.
I don't understand the concept of having to commit an entire life to another person simply because you've slept with them or because you're promised to that person and that's the only person you're going to sleep with. Like, how do you even make a decision like that, not knowing anything about the sexual world prior to that?
That's a great question.
It's like hiring someone for a job that they have no experience with and just taking a chance on it and like, I think you'll do well at this company.
Like no one really knows when you're going into a marriage how that's going to go.
Well, true, but to be like you're really taking a chance if you really like if you've never had sex at all and you're
Oh, good.
still like you're marrying someone that you don't really know because in a lot of cases, especially in purity culture, you're marrying someone you have not known very long because I mean, how long can people hold it together without having sex with each other before like nope, you got to get married. If you're having lustful thoughts, you got to marry that person. Hurry.
You're making me think that, maybe we could come up with an idea where we like move in together with someone and like, live with them and do life with them and decide if like, hey, would this work out to like join ourselves legally? Because that's what marriage is, right? So,
Live in sin, Patty? No.
oh, but doesn't that seem logical if you're going to marry someone and commit to this thing with someone you don't know like all that well because you haven't lived with them yet, that maybe you should just live with them and see how it goes?
Yeah.
Hey, Christians, if you're listening, I just want you to be really clear about what I'm saying right now. I'm saying that it makes fucking sense to live together, to live in sin with someone without being married to them. Yeah, it makes sense. It just makes sense. Anything purity related makes no sense around that situation. Well, Nancy, I mean, you and I have talked quite a bit about, I guess, pieces of our experiences that I would say add up to what our experience with purity culture was. Um, but I think for me, one of the most impactful things that led me to actually, mostly stay pure until I got married was,
Mostly.
I can address that. But it was having had a conversation with our mom when I would say not even quite 10 years old. And it was, probably around the time I had just had sex ed at school. And so I was thinking about these things, and it was like the moment of fully recognizing that people did this act because they wanted to and for fun. And oh my God, they can do it outside of a marriage. And so it was like all of that recognition that that actually can all happen, and like the world view, like I guess the world's view of sex stuff
Mhm.
came into my awareness, not just the WCG and what we were taught at home view of sex, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So I had a lot more questions by then because I just understood that, oh, there are different perspectives on this sex thing. And so I asked mom if she had ever had sex before our dad.
You asked her
And
that? Oh,
yeah, I did.
bold.
Or when she wasn't married or something, because I don't remember if I knew about her first husband at that point. But she told me that she had, at quite a young age, gotten engaged to someone and slept with him, and then he'd left her. And so I I can't say that I consciously thought about that as I moved forward, but I do think that it was from that point that like I was on board with purity culture, because to me, if the whole point of being sexy and having sex maybe would be to get a guy, like is, what my life goal seemed to be up, for all those years, then I found out that that's not a foolproof plan, right? Because here mom had done it and then he left her. So I was like, well, shit, maybe they really do want a pure woman then. He didn't just want that floozy that slept with him just because they were engaged. I don't know how I thought all of this through, but this is just how I'm trying to understand it now. Um, but yeah, that's where I think I internalized the idea that, give it up before you're sure you landed him and he might leave you. So, I mean, I kind of think that was a bigger influence on me than any of the chewed gum, etc. analogies that were told to me. And actually, it wasn't a chewed gum analogy that I really remember. It was um it was WCG while we were in Wisconsin, so 13 plus. They were talking, I believe, about a pan of brownies. And they were talking about sexual sin and the protestations of a teenager to say, "Oh, we were just making out, Dad," or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And the example was, "Okay, I made this pan of brownies for you. It's really good. I put all the good stuff in it, but there's just a little bit of cat litter. So that's fine, right? So what do you think about those brownies? Do you want those brownies? Because it wasn't, it's just a little bit. Just a little bit of sin in it."
Just a horrible analogy. That's so terrible.
Yeah.
So
So I
disgusting.
thought about cat litter and brownies for a very long time also.
Well, and I didn't know this about mom too, that she had been engaged and then the man left her. And I think things like that might need to be established too. If one person is thinking, oh, this might actually turn into something, and the other person is like, no, I really just want sex. And like, we should feel more free to discuss things like that and like where we're at. But I think for women especially, it's put in our minds that we need to find a husband and we can't just go around sleeping with men for our own pleasure. That's just not because they'll do that, like they're doing really the same things that we want to do, but we have it in our minds that we have to marry the person. And so when they sleep with us and then leave, like, oh, I guess they were right. And then we feel guilty. Okay.
It's like a fear of rejection thing,
Right. Mm-hmm.
right? And that's definitely one of the tactics used in the wheel of power and control that is cultic in nature, that is indicative of an unhealthy style of relating to each other.
Right. Yeah.
Mhm. I mean, and think about the psychological damage. So let's say you're a kid that believed the brownie analogy, but you also had a boyfriend and you did make out a little bit, and oops, once a finger slipped up there. Um,
Which hole?
whichever one you want to be upset about, I guess. Um, but it's like if you've heard that and believed that, you're now carrying this idea that I'm not good enough anymore because I didn't own myself to begin with, and now I've damaged these goods for the person I was supposed to save it for. Um,
Damage what? As far as physical go, nothing changed.
no, nothing,
So
but you've
fucking
been taught
gross.
that. It doesn't have to be true or real for the psychological damage and the feeling of, oh, I'm no longer good enough to completely impact not only who you choose to be with, right? Because you're going to find
Mhm.
someone who's going to reinforce those negative ideas about you if that's where you live. And you're going to not be able to stand up for yourself in those relationships because maintaining that relationship that is your safety and your entire sense of worth because you were supposed to find a man and land your man and keep your man.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's not going to let you live up to your fullest potential.
Mm-hmm.
If you're just living in fear of keeping that false sense of safety around, that is terrible. But that's what we're taught. I mean, this is getting into gender roles a little bit, but it's all connected. Purity culture is the training program for Christian gender roles. We're going to train girls to be afraid and to seek approval from men, and we're going to teach men to be predators. And we're going to teach them that they just can't control themselves. And so they better keep their woman in line so that they can stay in line. And that is a problem. It's
Mm-hmm.
not how we should be doing it.
Oh, I remember Herbert W. Armstrong making a reference in, I believe it was his autobiography, where he references a man and a whore or prostitute. Like the man got to keep his title of man, but the woman was just reduced to a whore or sex worker, prostitute. Yep. Thanks.
Purity culture has the effect then of making women turn on each other too, because
Oh,
they are taught that they are in competition with each other for the almighty men that are then their sense of safety and their entire well-being.
yeah. You wouldn't believe, Patty, how many times, and I'm actually surprised this isn't discussed more often, but how many times I have been accused by other women of like sleeping with their husbands, with their boyfriends. You'd be like, you know me, I'm kind of a more masculine dude most of the time, and I love like going out to the bar with my male friends and having a beer or whatever. Like I just feel more comfortable usually in male spaces. My sense of humor is right along with them most of the time, and I know you usually hang out with more females most of the time. But just the rudeness, just the disrespect of all of them thinking that I was sleeping with their husband. It's like wasn't they weren't mad at their husband, they were mad at me as if I was doing something to lure them in. And in the military, this actually happened to me a lot. It's primarily men. And I made a lot of friends with all the guys in the military. I loved hanging out with them, but oh my God, if they had wives and girlfriends, watch out. I mean, like that speaks more to their own insecurities than anything.
Oh, absolutely. But that is, it's more pointed in churches and cults, but women are taught to like police each other and keep each other in line because we are taught we're in competition with each other for the resources of men.
I've even
Yikes.
had ex-girlfriends of guys I've been not even dating, just like kind of hanging out. And they would stalk me on whatever MySpace back in the day and like, who the fuck are you, bitch, you slut? Like, I'm sorry, this is your ex-boyfriend I'm hanging out with, and you have a problem. Why? This friend of mine, I just the insecurity. And I do feel for these poor women, they're gotten to that point where they're that territorial about them having female friends. And I'm just like, if I was a dude, you would not have any issue whatsoever. Again, it goes back to that whole I do not agree with the fact that men and women cannot be friends.
Yeah. I mean, that is such a good point. And, maybe I don't know how often it's talked about as a result of purity culture, but I
Mhm.
absolutely see that as a problematic result of purity culture. When we have this thing where adult women cannot just be a friend, cannot just be friends with adult men.
Yep.
Like, if we hadn't made ourselves so worked up into a tizzy about sex and we just knew that that was a thing that happened between two people sometimes, but most of the time humans just do other stuff, we probably wouldn't be all weird about it. And we could probably do a little bit better at having friends of the opposite sex. And I think without getting all romantically involved, and I think we'd be better for it. Like
Right.
if we interacted with each other and we weren't all binary and feeling like we had to be this certain way or that certain way and never the two shall mix is like really quite damaging to us. Like we're really kind of cheating ourselves of a lot of richness of this human experience to be able to have friends that think in all different ways. Because there's like a
Mhm.
whole different hormone bath going on in the brains of men. And that means we are going to have some differences in how we interact, and those hormones are not split down the middle in men, women, binary, so anyone doesn't mistake me there.
Yeah.
But yeah, like the hormones that are bathing our brain do make a difference in who we are and how we act. And I think I would love to have like access to be friends with all those brains?
Right. Yes. Oh, Patty, I remember when I was going to evangelical church. It was actually Oak Hills. Okay. This is when I was a lot younger, testing my feet in the waters before my several year evangelical experience. Um, no one invited me to anything because I was a single girl at the time. Nothing. As soon as I got a boyfriend and I brought him to church with me to check things out, all of a sudden we got invited to everything, every social event out there. Oh, we'd love for you two to come join us at this, prayer after service thing and blah, blah. I'm like, you bitches didn't even give me the time of day. You little cunts looked at me as if I was going to steal your husbands away or something, as if I would actually want their husband. Give me a break.
Right. It's almost like a rubber band effect in the church. They're like working so hard to keep boys and girls apart from each other for all those years. And then they're like graduate high school or whatever age they deem able
Hmm.
to get married and start building their quiver full of children. And they're like, well, let go of that rubber band. Let's see who we can smash together as fast as we can
Right,
to
that's
make more
exactly how it was.
babies. Yeah. It's like very head snapping.
That's the rest of your
Yeah.
story. You were deep into purity culture, and I was not at
Hmm.
all.
Well, yeah. I mean, I was fully indoctrinated. I was carrying the fear of, being left by someone, even if I was engaged and then did it. But so then I was like so primed to think that purity culture made sense, and I took pride in it. I like really, I read books that, we said it earlier, I Kissed Dating Goodbye. Oh,
Yep.
yeah, that book was a big deal to me back then when it came out because they made it so attractive, right? It was like one
Really? I
more,
didn't find it attractive at all.
well, if you were already enmeshed in that, they had merch, Nancy, right? I mean, this is to me, this is like when merch as a way of engaging with something really started. I mean, maybe if I'd been in WCG doing their correspondence courses, this would already be a thing I would think about. But it was like when you got into evangelicalism in the, late 90s, early 2000s, it was like there were t-shirts, there were books, you could get a Jesus fish on the back of your car.
Oh
Like
God.
these were the things that showed you were in the club, right? And isn't that what
Hmm.
people are looking for out of a church or a cult anyway, is they are looking for a place to belong, among other things. Right. And so if belonging is what you're looking for and you're in a group and they tell you, well, you need to behave in these pure ways to be in our group and you need a group, you kind of get on board, right? Even if that means shoving down your own human desires.
I never once had that, Pats. I never once shut down my own human desires. I went after every desire I was seeking, all of them. And I never once felt guilty for any decision I made. Nothing. Like purity culture, you can't believe how cringy as fuck I thought that was. I didn't like anything about it. I had to hide the fact from my evangelical friends. I was like, oh man, you wouldn't believe this hot couple I slept with last weekend at the club. It was great. Now, like, I want to tell them all about it, but like, they're not interested in that, at least, during that time period. It just purity culture made me sick. I thought it was gross. I'm just like, oh, it's so cringy. And like, oh, do this for like Jesus. If I hear Jesus' name one more time, I swear, like, oh my God, like
Well,
stop.
so
It's
why, Nancy? Why did it work on me and not on you? Like, I have this whole set of like bodily emotions that come over me when these topics come up.
I don't know. I have
Like
no
I
idea
can
why.
still remember that sinking feeling that like I'm yucky, dirty. I shouldn't be touching my body like that. I mean, we're
Never.
getting into masturbation again, but
Hey, they all coincide.
they do. They all lead one right into the other, but like why is that? Why was I able to be have my emotions twisted like that to where it would literally make me ignore my own body's needs and desires? Like that's some fear,
Oh,
right? Like it had to have
no.
been made so clear to me that I was not going to be okay here or in, after this life if I did those things.
Because
Like,
they indoctrinated the shit out of you, Pat. That's the only conclusion I can come up with. And they just expected you to teach me. Like I said, the trickle down effect. They expected to teach you and you teach me. I I don't know. I was a little rebellious black sheep, I guess. I never really thought about it. I'm like, again, I just found good ways to lie and cover my tracks. I'm going to do what I want. I'm not going to feel guilt and shame over it because that really wasn't a thing when it came to sex and sexual expression. That was not a thing when it came to sexual expression. I never had that
I
ever.
feel a little jealous because I was a human too and still needed to like touch myself. But I also was a human that wanted to be sexual. Like whether it
Yep.
was the fact that I knew I needed to catch myself a man and that was the way, or whether I just somehow like that, like the idea of it, like the clothing of it. I always wanted to be like sexy and sexual. But I like
Hard,
had to
sexy pets.
hey, thanks. But I
Hey.
actually had to shut that all down, like hard, and it was like, we're humans. We have these hormones, as we've talked about. These things are flowing through our body and are going to generate desires and needs that aren't just like a psychological, oh, I just really want to get off, or I just want, like but that's what they would tell us. They would make it seem like anybody actually really wanting to have sex was gross and wrong and weird, and they're obviously perverted if they actually like want it, you know?
But I just say, they can go fuck themselves. I don't know. In my mind, I was like, I don't care
That
about
wasn't
these.
okay either, though, we know, right?
Oh, well, yeah.
You can't just
Metaphor.
go
They can
fuck
go
yourself.
fuck themselves.
Think about the psychology of this, though. So you've got young people. We've got raging hormones in young people. We've got
Mm-hmm.
young women who feel like they have to catch a man and also not pay attention to their desires and somehow also fend off his desires while he's being taught that he can't do anything about his desires. And so he needs to seek a woman that can meet his desires and also not drive his desires on in inappropriate ways. What? So we've got people in those conditions becoming adults and now being given access to their bodies, supposedly in a way that's theirs, but still not really, because God's got rules about that too. That's
Messes with your
not a
fucking mind.
situation, right? It messes with your mind. It's puts you in a place where you are not able to be open and curious to yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we imagine all of that shit gone, we're not talking purity culture. We're not saying that you have to save yourself. We're teaching you that you are an autonomous individual and you can be empowered to build your life. If we're doing that, well, then I think we're talking about something entirely different when someone is like experiencing their own sexuality or exploring their own sexuality, because we should have the freedom to know that this body is ours and that touching this body should be for the purpose of making it feel very good. And when
And
we make it feel
want it.
very good, if we are confident in ourselves and we are healthy and we connect with another human that we know is healthy and we feel like they are safe for us, then we have already learned what we like about our own bodies. And so then we can share that with that person, share our body, share what we like about it, and they can do the same for us. And it's a really cool thing that humans get to do, y'all. And it's not dirty and it's not gross and it is nice. And we've kind of yucked it up with purity culture. So it's kind of nice to have a minute to think about the psychological damage that purity culture's done to people. And then think about, what if we pull all that back? What if
Mm-hmm.
we pull it back for ourselves and tell ourselves a new story? What if we pull it back for the children that we're raising and so they start in a different place with their own knowledge that they own themselves, right?
Yeah.
Like that is how we change the world. I know I get a little like too overarching with that and stuff, but no, I think it's true. It's how we change the world. If kids know they own themselves and that we are responsible to care for ourselves and for each other in a world that we are all co-creating, I will stand by
And are you free to be your sexually expressive self now?
that. Oh dear.
Hmm.
I'm getting there. I guess in the masturbation episode, it probably seems like I'm pretty free about all of that, given how I addressed it. But, even if I do go and take my pleasure and I have shucked off a lot of the conditioning and indoctrination that made me fearful, that made me feel like I needed a man's approval. Some of that definitely still lingers and does affect me just even like mentally and emotionally.
Hmm.
I think there's things that still come up, like the dirty words or whatever. Like sometimes I
Fuck.
think those I know, but I mean, they still come up. But it's like some of those thoughts of like, oh, that's dirty. Oh, you shouldn't do that. Oh, that makes you bad, whatever. Some of those thoughts used to come up really fast and really powerfully so that they would like make a yuck feeling come over me and make me stop what I was doing. Right. So it was like, first, it would just stop me in my tracks and I wouldn't, and I'd go away and yuck feeling everything. And then it
Hmm.
would be like, okay, I can actually like that it comes up, but it's not as loud now because I've told it a new story, right? I've been like, no, it's not dirty. I own me. This is okay. I'm alone or whatever. And so it's like, then it's just a little icky feeling, but you can hold space for yourself and be like, I know why that feeling's there, right? And kind of move and do that thing anyway and accept the feelings. But then every time you do that thing that you were conditioned not to, but isn't actually bad, the feeling of I'm bad, I'm wrong, I'm dirty is going to be less and less
Hmm.
until you get to a point where like the thought might pop up where you like it's like over here, like that thought is off in the distance and you can kind of hear it shouting at you, but it's not stopping you anymore. It's not loud enough to get in your way or to make you feel sad or ruin your day, right? And that is the work of processing and healing. Do you get these voices, like the
No,
old voices from the past of like, oh, you should be doing it this way?
no, no. Even back in the church, that's why I was so silent as a kid, Pat. I never believed any of this shit. I never let anyone make me feel like guilty for anything. I know societally it always did that to people. It didn't do it to me.
So you were never afraid that things would go poorly for you in your life if you didn't do it a certain way, or if you did do that thing you weren't supposed to do?
Nope.
Because it somehow made it into my kid brain and growing up brain that if I did those things, I would
Firstborn.
like ruin all my chances of happiness, XYZ. Yeah.
No.
But that was purity culture teaching, was like,
I
the idea that you're taking something from your future.
The only time that I really feel like those sorts of messages actually got in was I think I probably would have dated a lot more women than I did, because I didn't have a chance to explore that side of my sexuality, which, I've always been interested in girls as well. But when I was deep into evangelicalism, even though I didn't believe in all the shit, it was just cultural for me. Um, yeah, I guess I didn't want anyone to find out that I was going to gay bars and that I was kind of seeing this girl once, and obviously we fizzled out because I just couldn't, um I guess, be free with her. So that's the only when it came to men, no problem. Oh man, no problem. But when it came to girls, I think that definitely squashed me down a bit. Like I did not want anyone to find out.
Oh,
It wasn't a God thing because I never believed in a God. It was the people around me I didn't want to find out. So I did not have guilt there. I just got better at, going out on my own to clubs and whatever else. But that's something I definitely would have explored more, had I had the opportunity. And evangelicalism didn't make me feel a certain way about, being bisexual or whatever. Yeah.
okay. Can we just be really open about this for a second? That like I knew your first sexual experience was with a girl when you were quite
Mhm.
young. I
Yep.
did not know that you maintained an interest in girls and even went out to gay clubs to meet girls. You never told me that.
Mm. Yeah, it was a fun little period. Yeah. One of the most serious. Oh God, she was an absolute babe. She looked like Carmen Electra. Whew. Chelsea. Yep, she was beautiful woman. But unfortunately, I was in the military at the time. I was going to an evangelical church at the time, and even though I didn't believe all that shit, that was still the world that I was in. And she was very much a, progressive woman, and obviously,
Mhm.
I happened to go to a gay club with our friend Bree, and that's where, she approached me. It would have been totally fine with me at the time had I ended up with a woman or a man. It didn't matter. But that was just not
Oh,
something I felt I could explore.
it's so interesting to me, Nancy, that here in all of our discussions of bodily autonomy and purity and all the things we've revisited about this, you have been very serious that the purity culture message didn't get through to you at all. Even
Mhm.
today, you're saying that. And yet, take just a tiny little turn on that,
You know,
and it's a woman you're interested in, and all of it did come into play.
right.
So that's fascinating.
Again, that was just the people around me whose opinions I cared about. It wasn't a guilt and shame thing with any sort of fucking God. Give me a break.
But with heterosexual activity, you didn't feel that purity message. It was just the anti-gay message that you got.
Yep, none whatsoever.
I'm really
Yeah,
glad
well,
you brought that up because I think we do want to do an episode covering what it was like for LGBTQ folks growing up in the WCG and some of the messaging that they got kind of
if we
like
can find any, good
impacting.
luck.
Well, I know, but I mean it was clearly out there. It was just like such an assumption that it
Mhm.
was just not okay already, So it was like they almost didn't have to say it in the
Right,
WCG that being gay wasn't all right. I mean, let alone like transgender folks or whatever. It's like the hate that exists just has to keep transforming to some other group. And it's
right.
like, at least what I can see is that hate is getting weaker and shrinking with every new iteration.
Remember, this was just one particular time period that I had this issue. I mean, in my early 20s, I partied all the time with whoever, threesomes, it didn't matter. But those later years when I was in the military and I got into evangelicalism was when people just they policed and monitored my behavior all the time, just like they did with anybody. I had this roommate and she was really like controlling and a narcissist. And so I was really afraid that she would find out.
Oh, so your roommate wasn't gay that you knew of, but was there probably keeping you in line.
Right. And that's what I'm saying. Like, I don't know if it was really a purity culture thing, but like a result of purity culture. Does that make sense? Like, it was just this
I agree.
mind
Well, didn't you
that.
say that was in the same time frame that you were in that MLM, right?
Right. It's all the same time period. Yeah. We're talking like, you know, 2000, gosh, maybe 10 to maybe as late as 2013, maybe.
So in this time, you are in an evangelical church, in the
Hmm.
military, and an MLM.
And it still didn't really sink in for me either, Pats, because this brain has taken, a lot to crack. I've always thought the way I wanted to. I've always done what I've wanted to, but this was the time I was at my weakest. Like you said, I was very floaty during this time period. I didn't really live anywhere. Um, Military, I had just gotten back from Iraq in 2009. And then I got out of the military in 2015. So in those few years, I was in the MLM Amway when I was overseas in 08, 09. Because I remember getting packages sent there and people fucking hated me, of course. But really, I was just trying to impress the people back home that were in this. Again, it's a group, how MLMs work, where you have your people and everyone gives you, you know, fake smiles and approval to keep you going. Yeah, keep bringing in money for this. Keep putting ties in at church because everyone went to the same church and all that. Like I said, I've never set foot in a church because I actually wanted to. It was these people. Like I did not like their reaction to me. And I didn't have anyone else. I didn't have anyone else at the time. I didn't know, where I was supposed to live because I was just kind of in between jobs. You get back from Iraq and like, what do I do? I don't have a place to live. I don't have another job yet. And so, yeah, people take advantage of that vulnerability. So there's lot more I could have explored during that time period, and that was the perfect time to do it, actually. But I just squashed it, so missed out a lot of stuff, which is different from my, extreme partying years in my early 20s, which, a lot of that I don't remember, which is fine. I had fun. But again, that was kind of a reaction to, my parents just kind of abandoned me on my own and like, hey, here's life, figure it out. So I chose to go the route of just having fun and not feel guilty about it. But yeah.
Well, but what I hear you saying in there also is that our parents abandoned us. You were 17
Yep.
and you'd been having a pretty wild time living on the edge, trying to live on your own, partying all crazy,
Fuck yeah.
and it wasn't going well.
Not for
It
why.
well,
I was just kind of masking my contempt, maybe. I didn't know how to navigate the world, Pets. I had no idea what to do. Like, what do I do? Am I supposed
but
to get a
look,
career? Like, if the world's gonna end anyway? Hmm.
well, right. So here you end up in this place of like kind of not knowing how to navigate the world because we were taught it was going to end. And
Right.
so where did you find yourself? Literally, Nancy, you found yourself in an evangelical church and MLM and the military. You literally found outside of cults and religion. Well, no, that is religion. You literally found like three of the most
Isolating.
controlling and isolating places you can find. Like MLMs, all the manipulation tactics and the
Mhm.
wheel of power and control, it's there. Evangelical churches, is it a little softer than cults? Yes, but it's there.
Wow, isn't that something? That's crazy. All these
Hmm.
different chapters of life. Yeah.
But despite all of that messaging back and forth for me and, being worried about sleeping with someone before I was married and all of that, it's like, I actually did it. Did I do not pee in the V other sexy things? Yes. I did a pretty good job. I actually did wait to fully have sex for the first time until I got married. Um,
Ugh, you rebel.
like a good Christian kid. But I mean that I think I've said it on the channel before. That doesn't mean I didn't do other sex acts because for some reason, purity was talked about all the time, but they didn't talk a lot about specific acts. And so it was like P in the V sex was kind of the one thing we all thought about.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and hand jobs, blow jobs, it was like no one was telling us not to do those things. And I
Loophole,
think
loophole. That's where that comes in.
well, that's a song by Garfunkel and Oates. They did a song about well, it's fuck me in the ass because I love Jesus. But
I remember.
fuck me in the ass because I love Jesus.
Jesus.
Yeah. So, I mean, unfortunately, I might have even mentioned this on the channel before, but I think that they made that song because that was real. That there
Right.
actually were a ton of evangelical girls for some reason thinking that they could do it in other ways and that the one God cared about was up the hoo-ha. And so there was girls having anal sex before having vaginal sex because it would make their boyfriends happy and apparently also not make God mad. I I don't know how that
Weird
happened.
dichotomy.
Well, right, but see, this is the shit that happens when we enforce rules on each other that don't comport with who we are as humans and don't honor
Right.
us for who we are, right? So, I mean, throwing a purity ring on a girl and telling her that that means she's going to keep her legs closed until she's married, like, great. You just subjected her to knowing not enough about her own body and possibly getting into a relationship with a hurtful person.
Mm-hmm.
Like we think, oh, isn't this cute? I mean, we even make it to where it's not cute in purity culture. Have you heard of like daddy-daughter dance things where they like literally
Yep.
kind of like marry the daughter to the dad? until he gives her to the husband or something. I'm like, okay, that feels like a step backwards, you guys. Right?
It
Like
is.
I have a problem with weddings, the dad giving away the bride like she's owned. But I mean, walk it
Same.
back to biblical times and we are just straight up talking about a livestock transaction. Why would we do such a thing as a daddy-daughter thing, you know? Anyway, I have big feelings about the evangelical bullshit from the chewed gum to the brownies to the rings to all of that. I think it's just been so hurtful and so harmful
It is.
toward women's liberation and empowerment. You know, it's
Mhm.
like the second half of women getting rights. It's the
Well,
emotional
and
part, you know, it's like we can have the physical rights, but until we have our emotional and physical autonomy together, we're still just as fucking trapped.
if we're not being directly impacted, there's someone like me who is impacted because someone else is pushing purity culture on me. Again, trickle down effect from the pastor or minister, the ideology goes into other people, and then other people are trying to promote it in other people, or just flat out tell them, no, you have to do it this way. And then they make you feel guilty or give you the silent treatment. Yeah, nice.
Hmm. Well, right. And I mean, if you look
And that's a
at,
gross feeling. You don't want to feel that way like you've disappointed people. I wasn't worried about disappointing God because I didn't fucking believe in him. I was worried about disappointing other people. I'd be like,
hmm
oh, well, you believe this shit. Okay, well, I really don't want to offend you though. But man, if you knew the things that were actually going through my mind that I actually wanted to do, you would probably not be friends with me. You.
well, but you talk about the idea of not wanting to disappoint someone. And
Mm-hmm.
then you set up a toxic environment where females aren't valued or their only value comes from their sexual purity for a man. And you set up men to be predators because you tell them they won't be able to resist the luring of a woman. And then you have situations like we've heard over and over from the people who have interviewed on our channel who grew up in the WCG, right? Women who, when they were yet children, like barely pubescent children, had men coming onto them, doing things to them, touching them, actually having sex with them. And it was overlooked because it was a man and because that girl clearly then did something because of how it was set up, because of the beliefs that were put into everyone's heads about who they were and about who the opposite sex was.
Can we just have a moment to be mad because that's so fucking disgusting. Like it points in throughout history if a woman gets raped, that's clearly her fault and she gets
Mhm.
killed. Fuck all the way on.
Right. Well, and we can be mad about it because I think we want to think, oh, isn't purity culture cute? Aw, love waits. Aw, true love. Look at us. We're just loving everybody.
Love
We're
weight,
doing
that's
it
so
right.
disgusting. Oh my God.
We're putting a ball and chain on your finger to make sure you do what we want. Oh, isn't that cute?
No, it's not.
No.
Actually, my version of love waits is I waited till I was in like my mid 30s until I got married because I had a chance to make sure I knew who I was and what I wanted so that I could properly pick a person for me. No way was I ready to get married after like age 18. Holy shit, people. I knew nothing about myself, about the world, and I was expected to choose my life partner for the rest of my fucking life. Are you kidding me? No, I chose him as an adult.
Exactly, as it should be.
Yeah, as it should be. But we feel pressured to marrying people that we're either not ready for or are just not good for us. We literally have a family member, Patty, that told me, "Oh, if your spouse is beating you, you're supposed to stay with them." I lost so much respect for that person. I'm like, "Are you kidding me? You think that's okay? Or you're just supposed to pray about it and God's supposed to take care of it?" No, that is a dangerous situation where your life is in danger. You get the fuck out of that situation.
I mean, here I was ready to talk about how women bring shame into their marriage because sex just has shame attached to it no matter what they do. But you just took it to a whole nother fucking level. 'Cause
Good.
yeah, how are we supposed to know who we're choosing for our whole life at that point. If we
We
haven't
don't.
had a chance to even be ourselves yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Date yourself for a long time until you get to know who you are and what you want. And you know what? I'm married now and I'm doing the same stuff that I was doing when I was single. The things that I enjoy. It's just like I feel like the spouse is just a really nice bonus. And like, yeah, I have a partner now that I can do this with, that I can travel with, that I can share things with. You know, it's not just me anymore. But again, I would have lived my life just fine without him too. It would have been just fine. It's not like I needed another person to complete me. That doesn't make any sense. That means I'm not enough as I am. That means I'm not enough.
But isn't that what they want us to think by
Yes,
doing
it
purity
is.
culture?
Right.
Because if we think we're not enough, they can control us.
Mhm.
I think that's the whole thing. The one other thing I wanted to bring up is I hear over and over how people who were raised in purity culture kind of get like sex built up into this big thing of like thinking, it's like life changing. Like, oh my God, like the heavens are splitting open and the whole world is now different because this magical thing called an orgasm inside of a pussy happened, right? Like, but you know what I'm saying? Like, it's kind of built up into this thing. Like, it's just like it's your whole life's focus is on it, right?
And they're just disappointed.
This is what I'm saying.
They're just disappointed. They have to pretend they're satisfied. Oh,
Like,
this
oh my
godly
God, it was
man I'm
so
married to.
good. Like, no, hardly anybody's first time is awesome. Like, no, it's a little awkward and you're figuring
No, it's
things out
not.
just like anything else you're doing first time. And
I
that's
again, I'm
okay.
gonna
That's
go
how
back
it
to
should be.
yeah. Again, I'm gonna go back to Girl Defined over here. Like one of the sisters is like, of course, I love the fact that we waited. It couldn't possibly be better than this, being in this marriage and like and then sleeping with my husband and waiting. I'm like, girl, you have nothing to compare it to. How can you say that? I'm not saying that we should be comparing, but we all do it. You're like, if you have nothing else to compare it to, of course you're gonna say this is awesome because I don't know any better.
Well, right. And I think we kind of recognize that if you did a survey of Christians and non-Christians for how good their sex life is, you're going to get the Christians saying their sex life is better
Of course, because we're
because,
more honest.
be, right. Well, maybe, but they've been told that if they're doing their sex in the God-honored way, it will be good. And they, as far as they know, are doing their sex in the God-honored way. And so they're like, oh, yeah, so this is good because I've been told it's good.
Right.
You realize that. Yeah, there's not a moment of like, well, what do I actually think? And how can I think of that? Because you're right, there's nothing to compare it to.
Well, Christians feign a lot of things, Pat.
Well, you have to
Sex is
because it's
one
not
of
true.
them, yeah.
Not it's not even possible to believe that it's real for real. So you have to feign things. So what happens then to, I would say especially women, but anybody who thinks that sex is going to be this like, angels alighting from heaven moment, and then they have sex and they're like,
Oh,
oh, okay. It's like, but if you are raised thinking like this is a thing that humans do, and yeah, it's kind of private. It's kind of like how pooping's private, but for different reasons, and here's why. Like
nice comparison. Comparing sex to shitting.
it's
It's kind of private, but
I think I should compare it to that
go ahead.
because it's as normal a human activity as pooping is. And once we realize it's as normal, and yes, it's different for reasons, and we'll choose to do it for different reasons, it is just as human and just as normal, and almost just as many people do it. And so and so I just
Oh,
think if we
man.
start talking about it that way, but Nancy, for real, if we start addressing it as this really human thing, like it's kind of not a big deal, it just has these ways we do it for really good reasons. Let me tell you them.
No,
We're
you're absolutely
there,
right. You're absolutely right.
you know? Like,
You're
okay,
not wrong.
my
You're
kids
not
are
wrong.
gonna hate me. My kids are gonna hate me. But when I became aware that my children were very into figuring out what was going on down there and touching around, I was like, great. And we talked about safety and hygiene.
Hmm.
And I told them it was their body. And it was the most normal thing I could make it be. Even younger, when I was talking about, like pointing to where's your cheek? Where's your elbow? Where's your chin? I'd say, where's your vulva? Right in the middle of all of that, because these are normal things. And as soon as we make it like the boogeyman or something separate or something weird or out there, we are fucking it up.
Yes.
When we like gun safety, when a kid is gonna go, I'm sorry, I'm from the Midwest. When a kid is gonna go hunting for the first time, they do a gun safety class. Like,
Right.
it's a dangerous weapon. So's your pussy. So's your cock. We should have safety lessons about them.
Exactly.
You know, these are things. These are
They are
things.
dangerous weapons. They're powerful weapons.
They're
And they have to be
powerful.
used in the right way, not in a God ordained way.
Is it that using it in the right way is right? Just like Herbert would say.
I realized that after I said it, I'm like, used in the right way. I'm like, oh shit. That can be
How
taken out of
about
context. Never mind.
how about used in a way that honors your body, your mind, and the people around you? I guess the last thing I'll bring up that I think is sort of one of those long-lasting effects, although I'm sure we could come up with 10 more, is the idea of perfectionism, right? And so
Mhm.
this is maybe more like sin in general, but I think because it relates to our bodies and our sexuality, that particular kind of sin is just so um, destructive to our psyches when we carry the burden of that.
Yeah.
So I think there's ideas around, where women will maybe have had some sexual experiences before getting married. And then once they're in their marriage, will experience things that like where they're grappling with either the guilt and shame still and can't get past it and therefore can't like let go and really enjoy that experience with their husband, um, or they find themselves in a place where they're hindered from all kinds of activities because they just actually think that they are sinful and they don't know how to redeem themselves, right? Like they're still carrying that guilt that they had sex before they got married. And so it like hinders them not only sexually, but also in building their relationship with their partner and
Mhm.
even in all of their other relationships because they just think that they're inherently broken, flawed, and will like never be good enough for their marriage. I mean, you can't really show up as your best self when you don't think that you're great.
You know what's perfect about that for the man? Is the woman will constantly be improving herself. She's going to try harder and harder to please him because she doesn't feel worthy. She doesn't feel like she's good enough or important enough. She's got that shame and guilt. And so,
It is kind of a perfect system. So first we tell the girls that they're not sexual, can't be sexual, and be careful because all those men are predators. And then when men inevitably do something without her consent, then she's told she's bad, and or she grows up and actually has sexual desire and has someone who cares about her, and then she does something that she gets in trouble for and now is vilified for. And so she's either of those scenarios, she's carrying the guilt and shame into her marriage where she feels like she'll never be good enough so that her husband then can take whatever he wants from her and she will always be struggling to try to please him and improve herself so he never actually has to improve himself in any way and she is always living under a self-imposed and potentially husband, church, and society imposed them. Okay.
yes, that's exactly how I was trying to word it.
Yeah, so when we're talking about how the church talked to us about like what our sexual sin in our younger life would do to our marriage, it was really quite gross. Like they would kind of say things that would make you think you would sort of be fucking up your whole life if you did something wrong now. It was like
Oh yeah.
they always made mistakes be as bad as it could get, right? Like total annihilation and stuff like that. So someone in our Discord who was also raised in a WCG offshoot was able to tell us a story about how it affected her to have that kind of messaging told to her. So I'll read what she had to say. One of the things that affected me a lot is the idea that our marriage would be cursed if we fornicated before marriage. Something as simple as a kiss would be enough to damage a marriage. Another is that if we did anything with anyone in the past, then we have taken from our future partners and have committed adultery already, and that once we get married, then we would forever compare our past relationships and actions with that of our husbands, so it wouldn't be as enjoyable or special with a husband.
You.
I think I was told that too, that you're
Yeah.
like giving a piece of yourself and you're always going to be comparing then. Oh, this one's about missionary position, saying she feels wrong doing anything else, even though she's enjoying it.
Wait, still feels guilty about it? Honey, until you've tried doggy style. I mean, Jesus, you're not living. You are not living if you have not been bent over the kitchen counter from behind, let me tell you.
Well, and since, we're human and when we have relationships, we do end up having sex a lot, like a lot of women do. Even in the WCG, they did. And so what that meant is instead of accepting that physical control when they decided to be in charge of themselves physically, they took that damage psychologically. So we had a listener write in and say this. In past relationships, I would always be in tears afterwards because I had sinned and it would eat me up. I think
Oh.
seeing it so shamefully and negatively has in ways numbed me now. So when I could do it and it was allowed in marriage, I still struggled because the lines are so blurred. Yeah, it's not a switch. Like if you're sexual, you're going to probably want to have sex.
You know
And then
what's
if
really
you feel guilty for it, how do you turn that shame part off? It's gotten attached to it. They psychologically damaged us with that. So this gets a little darker. But what I think, we mentioned how purity culture kind of sets men up to just believe that they can't help but be predators, right? So in some ways, it gives them a pass. Yeah. I mean, there's more ramifications to men too, but certainly that's the one that has the most blowback to women, because of the damage that it does to men. It angered me that we were being blamed for men's sins and lusts as well for the way we dress. I once was having a private conversation with a friend while at the Feast of Tabernacles about how a male at college forced himself on me, and I had told the professors, and it blew up, and I was being called a liar, and another member overheard, and he interrupted and blamed me for the male at the university overpowering me and trying it with me, and said I must have provoked him and led him on. So she's at the Feast of Tabernacles, the yearly biggest event in WCG calendar, talking about how she had almost been sexually assaulted, or maybe was, I can't quite tell. And literally someone just hearing her tell this story in the WCG is like, oh, you must have done something to bring it on. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
So not only does purity culture let dudes think they can do stuff like that, it lets dudes excuse other dudes doing it.
Oh.
Thankfully, there are plenty of men who don't buy into that bullshit too and see it for what it is and find themselves feeling very upset at how women are treated because of it. So this is not all men.
Yeah. And purity culture creates a lot of predators.
So after I say must have provoked him and led him on, he was laughing while saying it as well, but it was a serious conversation I was having that was private and upsetting as well. That was one of the things at college that happened that pushed me into a very dark place, which later worsened my health and led me to drop out.
Oh no. Oh gosh.
So these things are not just like, oh, I got told something stupid and now I grew up. These things last and impact us long term.
Yeah.
We can't just, oh, don't be a baby, grow up.
Right.
That's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. I have another one.
Okay.
All right. She says, in my church, girls were not protected. There was a man in church who was all over the young girls. Age 12 onward, he would nuzzle into our necks, not letting us go, making us hug for ages, stroking our backs and waist, telling us to wait for him, and when we turn 18, we will get married, and he's waiting for us, and he loves us, etc.
Ew. Ew, what a creep.
My dad told the church about this, and instead of stopping it, the ministry responded to say that this man had once fallen out a window and had brain damage, so couldn't help it. Thing is, he was able to think and do anything else perfectly fine, but when it came to touching girls, he couldn't help it. Their allowance of predatory behavior in men extended that far. I mean, we're not even talking about stories that come from outside of Armstrongist cults. And we know Armstrongist cults to be kind of nowhere near as brutal and intense as some of the ones where you've got the pastor or whatever marrying every 8-year-old. It wasn't that, but yet we still have this kind of shit going on. She goes on to say, my point being, we are treated as objects, and it's oftentimes the girl's or woman's fault. She says that at her congregation as well, it was taught that girls can't refuse to dance with a male. While this may sound small, I hated it, and it affected me, and I know others too. We are expected to say yes and don't get a choice even when we really don't want to. If we say no, we are deemed respectful and not ladylike. They were forced to dance with a man because he was a man. And it's like, not only is that about as rape culture as it gets on the DL, like that leads to women feeling like they can't say no later in actual rape. But I think, that seems like really obvious that they were forced to dance with men. But even think about just culturally how we tell little children that they have to behave. Like, oh, your Aunt Linda's here. You have to give her a kiss. And you have to subject yourself to hugging everybody, even if you feel yucky and scared and you don't want to. I mean, to me, that is, it's not the male-female dynamic, but it is every bit as important when it comes to our bodily autonomy, that we should not feel like, oh, just because that person's bigger than you and important in some way, you have to kiss them. No, fuck all the way off. Again, we're just straight up building rape culture from the time we've got toddlers. So
This makes me think, Pat, you remember the movie Napoleon Dynamite? There's this one scene where one of the girls, okay, Napoleon drew this picture for this girl and invited her to the prom, and she's like kind of put off, like she doesn't want anything to do with him, as is her right. She doesn't have to have anything to do with him, but her mother makes her go to the prom with him, even though, she's not comfortable with it, and so she ditches him there, but she should have had the choice of like, I don't want to go with him. What, her mother forces her to go to the prom with this guy just because he draws a picture of her, and so we're just being, again, fake nice to people without actually being able to have the opportunity to explain, like, hey, this is not something I want, and that's my choice.
I will say, I think in the Napoleon Dynamite thing, though, she made him go or her mom made her go with him because he was like a special ed kid. And she was like,
Is that what she thought?
Yes.
Isn't that even worse? Like kind of a pity party?
Yeah, but she was like, oh, you're not going to be the asshole. You're going to go with that nice boy who drew you a nice picture.
Does somebody really want to go to the prom with someone that doesn't want to go with them? Like, we need reality checks. We got to stop being, this fake nice to people and just explain, hey, I'm not interested in going with you, but thank you. That's very nice of you to ask. Plain and simple. It's like women that feel like they have to go on dates with guys. Like, that happened to me. I felt like I kind of like had to go on dates with men, otherwise they'd be angry at me. Which some of them are very thin-skinned. Like, if you reject, I've been called a bitch and a slut so many times because I have turned men away to be like, no, like drunk, just rude assholes. And yeah, they take offense to it and they start calling you names. Like, oh, okay, I'm a slut for saying no to you. Oh, okay. Have
And
a
that
great
comes
day.
and that comes from a culture of men thinking that they are entitled to whatever they want from women.
We've all run into those, haven't we? There's been some men that like I just didn't really feel like speaking to because I thought they were rude and I got called a stuck-up bitch. Yeah. Oh yeah. You name it, I've been called it for sure. But but somehow I've been called both a slut and a prude, so I'm not exactly sure how that works, but I've been called both.
I figure if you've been called both, you're probably on the average doing okay.
Yay. I'll take it. I'll take it.
How are we both doing with purity culture now?
I would say it didn't really affect me. It affected you the most, Pats. And eventually we both found our way into having great relationships in our life, be it with our husbands, with our friends, the people that we surround ourselves with, tribalism. We got rid of all the people in our life that didn't belong there. And we got to a point where we were strong enough, we were okay to say, I don't want you in it. I don't care if you are family or we've been friends for a while. I don't want you in my life anymore because you're not a positive influence for me. I can't be myself around you. You try to control me or whatever it might be. I think it all comes down to our relationship. At least that was the case with me. I just needed to get better people in my life. And there was just that one period of my life that I didn't have good people in it. What the fuck am I talking about? Most of my life didn't have good people in it until recently.
This whole problem then of reclaiming our bodily autonomy, because here we go through a childhood that squelches it and puts us in boxes. And then for us, the church disappeared, our parents moved away. And so then here we are needing to figure out our sexuality. And as you said, you kind of had always done what you wanted to do.
Oh yeah.
But for me, and I think for so many others, it's a whole process of
Hmm.
trying to figure out um of trying to figure out ourselves and be okay, you know, having sex, masturbating, being sexual, thinking sexual thoughts, like to be
Right.
okay with any of those things at all is a big deal. To even feel like I can just be free um, when I'm having sex, that isn't a complete process yet. And it's taken a lot of years of holding space for myself and understanding what was conditioned into me to disconnect me from my own body. Right. So there's been a lot of effort through the conversations you and I have had, through conversations I've had with all kinds of other people. Um, Another thing that can help is getting therapy really specifically for religious harm around this. Like,
Oh, for
this is
sure.
understood, right? Like this is understood in the world of healing and psychology and counseling and therapy. They understand that people are messed up by their religious experiences, by their time in church, by their exposure to purity culture.
Mhm.
And so there is a whole genre of therapy to help people like regain their bodily autonomy,
Yeah.
because it really is a situation of regaining that post abuse, and so some of those therapies are the same.
Yeah.
Hmm.
It all connects, and I'm glad you are free to explore your sexuality now, Pets.
Yeah, I know it is really nice to be able to shift the narrative around that in my head and the feelings in my body to take it from a place of shame and sin and to be able to move it to where I like me and like I like accept myself. I'm not
Yeah.
just saying how bad I am and trying to patch the holes with a man. I've gotten to a point where I can actually feel like, no, I'm empowered to do what I want to do with this meat suit that I wear. You know, I mean, it's mine, finally.
Yes. And I'm glad you don't have any of that left now. I mean,
It's a
yeah,
process. I'm not gonna
I
say I
know.
don't have any of that left. It's still there. Like I said, I think that noise, the voice of it gets smaller and smaller, but I don't know that it actually goes away because it is
Right.
part of your experience. I guess it's true that sometimes, you can be in a situation where you're just out having fun and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I haven't even thought about the fact that this was supposed to be a sin. So It can
Good.
get there. It can. Yeah.
Good. I never think about that. Because I never believed in sin. I
Yeah.
just believed in living on this earth and enjoying it, following my desires, which is the college experience that you should have had, Pats, and I'm sorry they deprived it of you. But now as an adult, you can take that back.
Since I got the churchy indoctrination, and it meant I didn't get the like natural ability built within me to like judge risk and things like that. If I
Mhm.
had gone into my college experience free to do what I wanted, um, and without that risk assessment, I actually think I might have caused some major problems for myself.
Well,
And
I mean, without
so,
risk assessment, you could have ended up with an STD and pregnancy, but that's what purity culture scares you into. They don't give you those safety measures. They just say, don't do this, or this is what you'll end up with. It's not even a question of whether or not it'll happen. It'll happen. So don't do it at all.
right. And so, yeah, it's like we can't just remove the purity culture or the religious teachings and not replace it with something else.
I
Right? Like
know.
we're raising whole humans who need to be able to think through things in the world and understand how it works and who to trust. And first and foremost of all of that is their bodies and how that works and what works for them and what doesn't. And so that's kind of my biggest thing when it comes to bodily autonomy is giving the kids their power over their own body, from the beginning. Like it's got to start there. Obviously, everyone should have autonomy over themselves, but for some reason, we like to really take it away from children and people of the female persuasion. So,
Well, people that are easier to control. Yes. Smaller and not as strong as some. In order for other people to feel big and strong.
that is why we keep talking about it and putting this out and hearing back from our listeners about this, because having these conversations does the work. That is what not only heals our pasts, but it starts to build something different for the future because we are talking about these things honestly.
Right.
So that's what we're going to do. All right. Well, thank you for joining Nancy and I for this episode, starting the conversation on purity culture. We would love to hear from you if you have stories that you would like to give air to, but even if you don't want to share them yourselves, we would love to hear your stories and share your stories if you would like us to. Also, if you are former WCG or from one of the Worldwide Church of God offshoots, feel free to reach out. We have a Discord specifically for WCG and offshoot survivors. All right, join us next time as we continue down the path of learning even more about our bodily autonomy. Like and subscribe. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah. Like and
Yay.
subscribe. I like this
Okay.
this pearl look. My purity. My purity.
Yes.
Yay.
Pure as a pearl, which is made by a piece of dirt inside of a bottom feeder.
Oh, they're not real pearls. But yes, like I'm just saying.